So in this section, we're going to go into creating a water surface or a water volume to have some objects splashing into the water and giving a water effect. So I'll start with the basics just to give you an overview of how it works, and then we'll polish it up in the end with the right modifiers and all of that. So to start with, again, what I'll do is I'll create a oops, I'll bring that back into view, a particle flow like this, and what we have now is just the basic of them falling down. I don't really need the spin, but I'll leave it there for now. We're just going to start with the basic. But what I'd like to do here is I'd like the particles to start with. I'd like them to interface with their environment. So if I grab the grid here, and I'm just going to move this aside. If I grab the grid and I move it at the top here, if I press play, you see that it's not going to really interact with the environment. So if I want the particles to kind of be contained, if I want to create a water surface or a water volume that will be contained within that area, I need to have the particles interact with their environment. To do this, I'm just going to grab one of the objects, and there's a modifier. It's a world space modifier called PFlow collision shape, and you have different ways of using it. So you see that it gives you this proxy in the viewport, but that's fine. That's not what's going to get rendered. It's just you can turn it off by turn off visualize collision shape, but if you want to see it, you can turn it on. So that's kind of just a preference here. But the idea is right now it's a static geometry. If it was animated, we would go here and say, well, we want to use a convex All capsule, or if it's an animated surface, we would turn it on as animated surface. But right now we're just going to say use the geometry because it's a concave area, so we cannot use a convex All. So the geometry, it needs to be simulated, and it's a static mesh. So we're just going to say activate, and now that it's activated, we are going to be able to reference it in particle flow. But if I press play now, nothing's going to happen. It's still going to go through because I need to tell particle flow to take that into account. And actually, I did place the collision shape only on the geometry here, but what I'll do is I'll just take it and copy it on the proxy of the pillars here. But you see that now we've got this. I've got this one here. I've got this one, and they're all activated, and they're all static geometry. But if I grab if I press play, you'll see that still they don't interact with the particle flow system. In order for this to interact, I need to bring particle view, and there's an operator in here called the MP collision. There's two of them, the intercollision and the collision. We're going to talk about the intercollision a bit later. Collision is with anything that's external to particle flow, and intercollision is for anything that's within particle flow, so intercollisions with other particles. So what I'll do is I'll bring in a MP collision, and the MP collision you need to define which deflectors you want to use. So I'll go by list, and I'll say all of those that I just created, I want them to be interacting with. Right now I'm just going to say I'm just going to use this. I don't really need to test anything now, so I'm just going to move this aside, and what you're going to see now is that this as soon as they touch elements of the environment, now they start to interact with them. And if I just move the grid, select the grid here and move it aside here, you'll see that those particles will just interact with everything there, and they're going to fall and kind of be trapped there. So that's a really good way to start something like water. So if I just go back and I bring the grid in the middle here, and we'd like to create a flow of water to fill that space. So first of all, the water that we want to simulate, we're not going to simulate it on cube. We're going to simulate that on spheres. I'm just going to go back here and say spheres. We're going to grab the small one. And the shape here, same thing. We're going to simulate that on spheres. So if I do a simulation now, you'll see that it's going to be a little bit, well, it's not that much better because now they're too much aligned. But if we start to align them a little bit less, it's going to work better. But the idea here is that bird grid is very rigid, very aligned, and all of these spheres are falling on top of each other in a very precise way. So there's a new operator again in Max 2014, and it's called the birth stream. The birth stream, going to replace it here, is represented by an icon. Again, it's an icon in the viewport, so I can grab it and move it, and I can animate it and define and emit it from it. It's just a stream of particles, and the beauty of this one is that it's a set of particles that do not overlap. So what it means is that you can do water simulation with this very efficiently because the particles won't overlap. But right now the stream it has a lot of speed, so if I just press play, you'll see that it's just going to go like this, and it's just going to spread all over. But it's very fast. It's going to, the water or the particles are being projected inside of the scene. So I can do a bit of fixing in there. So the distance of separation, the shape here right now we're set to 10. So I'll make it a bit bigger, maybe something like 20. So it's a bigger particle. So we're going to fill it faster, and it's going to keep the performance. The birth stream here, I'll say the separation, I'll make it 20 or 21 just so that they're all separated by each other. I'll say image stop, my animation timeline here is set to 200, so I'll set it to 200 as well. And the speed here, I'm going to reduce it to something like 20. So if I press play now, we are going to actually, you know what, the separation here, I'll make it probably like 21 is kind of a, actually, you know what? I know what I did. They're all emitted by the same exact point, so the icon is kind of small. So I'm going to make the icon a bit bigger so that we can start to see a bit more particles like that. So here we go. So now you see that we are emitting about 60, a rate of 60. So if I just press play, you'll see that we're going to get that, and it's just going to fall into place, and it's going to fill that space with water. If I want to have more particles, I can increase the rate here. Let's say that we go with 200, and now I press play. You'll see that we're going to have a little bit more particles to fill that space. And it's going to start to fill that. But the thing is that in order to get a water volume into this area, we need to let it, kind of fill and wait and wait and wait. And that's not really what we want. We want to, if you have, especially if you have a big, a complex structure or a complex hole where you want to fill with water, you don't want to wait for this in your animation. So what we're going to do, we're going to approach it a bit differently. The water stream or the birth stream here is really great for creating water splashes or water flow. But for our case here, we want to have water that is resting at the beginning of the simulation, and further in the animation, we want it to start splashing with objects. So what I'll do is I'll replace the birth. I wanted to show it to you, but I'm going to replace it again by a birth grid. The birth grid, the grid size is kind of small, so I'm going to make it something like 25, so we get a spread of particles. And the icon now is kind of small, so we're going to make it bigger. We're going to fill that space with particles, something like this, something like that, and make it a bit bigger. And now the particles will be emitted within the pillar and within that structure here. So what I can do is I can create a water volume that I'm going to restrict the birth grid to. So before I do that, I'm going to turn off the birth grid, and I'm going to do a few things. So I want to emit volume in here. So what I've done is I've done just a cube, and that cube here is filling that space. I'm just going to and actually I'm just going to show you in wireframe so we can see. So it's just a cube. You see it's in selected in white there. So it's kind of it's just a basic cube. If I go back to shaded view, I want to use this as my water volume. So I want to emit volume only from within that cube, but I want to remove the environment here, or the ground. I want to remove the pillar so that it becomes only this area where I want to have water. So to do that, I'm going to use Pro Booleans. I'm going to go in Compound Objects and Pro Boolean. I'm going to use Copy because I don't want to destroy anything in my scene. I want to create just holes into this. I'm going to use Subtraction and start picking. So I'm going to pick the environment, so just remove the environment. I'm going to pick that pillar, and now if I do isolate this geometry, you'll see that it's exactly what I want. It's that space in which I want to have water volume. So that's good. I'm going to exit isolation, and I can just turn it into an editable poly. I don't really care about its history, so I'm going to keep it as so. It's just a water volume. It's just where we are going to have water in our scene. If I isolate this again, I'm going to bring back the grid. So bring back 6 here, bring back the grid, and make sure that the grid fills that space with particles. So let's go back in shaded view, wireframe, sorry, and bring back the grid. Select the grid itself. Oh, I'm in isolation, so I'm just going to grab the grid and the water volume, like so, and then isolate those two objects. And my goal here is to take that grid and fill it with that whole space over there. So I'm going to make it a bit bigger, so something like this, a bit wider, so that it contains this grid, and it doesn't matter how big it is because we are going to limit it by the water volume after. Something like that. So that's good. I can exit my isolation, go back into my grid here. Oops, I'm going to bring that back in. Working at lower resolution, I have to remember. Bring back the particle view. I'll say restrict by mesh volume, and I'll pick the water volume as being my restriction. So now you'll see that we have only water within that space, and we've got the holes there. It all works perfectly. That's exactly what we want. So I don't need the water volume anymore, so I'm just going to hide it, and we have particles that are within that space, and it's perfectly what we want. What's going to be important is that the MP shape right now, in the MP shape, we define them as spheres, and the tolerance here is kind of low. So if we press play now, we're going to have some little bit of pushing back and forth. So for that, what I could do is just increase the tolerance to something a bit more to a different scale. So now it's going to fall down, and it's going to fill that space. So it's much faster to get that to fill that space and fill the volume with particles. So what I'll do here is, this is good. This is the, we want to create a natural flow of water. So I'll let the particles settle, something like this, and then I'll pause it right there. So it's around frame 139 where all of these particles are kind of settled in that space, or that in that position, where it's going to be a good point for our starting out simulation. So I don't want to wait for 139 frames before doing my my simulation. So what I can do is, there's an operator here called initial state. I'm going to drag that in, and initial state is a birth event, but it captures a particle system as is at the current frame. So it captures a state basically. So what I'll do here is I'll say initiate state from particle system or selected event. So I'll say add event 01. That's going to be my event 01. So this here, the initial state, will capture whatever is currently in the event 01 at the current frame. So I'll say here, calculate initial state. So it's going to calculate it. We are calculated at frame 139, but we don't want it to emit at frame 139. We want it to start at frame 0. So I'm going to reset this to 0. And if I turn off this event now and I connect this one here, you'll see that we get exactly, oh, actually, we want it. I'm just going to bring back the shape here. So I'm just going to copy and paste it here so we can see, paste, sphere, and we're going to show geometry. And you see that now we have, and actually the color is not the same, so I'm going to bring that like so, and we have our particle system here. So if I press play now, you'll see that at the beginning, from frame 0, it's going to start to emit like so. But the thing now is that we don't have all of the events, so I'll say MP shape, I want to grab the spin, I want to grab the world, I want to grab the collision. I'll say copy this and paste them. I'll just paste them as instance now, and we have exactly the same representation. So now we have the continuation of the simulation. I'm going to bring the world here at the bottom, something like this. The shape here, I'll bring it at the top, and I'm just reorganizing. And you see that now that I press the simulation, you see that all the particles are already settled, and this is what we want, because we want to start to simulate from there. So we want those particles to be simulated. So the MP shape is fine, the spin is still there, the MP collision is colliding with everything here, and the MP world makes sure that everything here is being simulated. So that's good. We're good to go. We're good to continue with that. So what I'll do here is I'll bring in a new element, and I want to kind of break that water pattern. So I'm just going to restore. I'm going to have that debris here, and that I'm going to use this as my only debris to show you the interaction with this system. So we have a particle flow event. I'm just going to move this aside. We're going to grab this one here. This one we don't need it. We're going to use it maybe later if we needed to change the initial water volume, but right now we're good with this. We have our particle system, and it's all good. Anyway, so what I want to do is I want to grab this. So I'll create a birth group, bring in a birth group, and I'll copy this, I'll connect it to my render node. The birth group, I will use the selected, and I'll hide the original one, and I'll show as the geometry. So this is my geometry, and right now it's not being simulated. So I'm going to grab in the shape. I'm going to copy this and paste it here. I need a simulation shape. So here I don't want to simulate on sphere, but on a convex all. For the water here, the shape, I'd like it to be very low density. So I'm going to make it 0.01, something very, very small. And for the shape here, for this one, I'd like it to be very dense density, so I'm going to make it to the maximum. So that's probably something like 10 would be good. So let's say 10. So it's much bigger density than the original one. I want to simulate in the same world, so I'll copy the world and I'll say paste instance, and it's going to be here in the same world. Here we go, and we got that going. If I want the debris to also be simulated in the same world, I can also use the MP collision, but right now I know it's going to fall only in this space, so I'm not going to care too much about this yet. So we have our MP shape, our MP world, we have our object, so if I press play, it should fall down, and it's not gonna interact with my particles. And why is that? So my MP shape, my initial event here, let me pause for a second. Alright, so I just replaced my MP shape here. Something went wrong. I don't know what happened there, but anyway. So I'm just going to press play, and you see that now the water is kind of moving, and then as soon as this object is falling in the water, it kind of pushes it away from the water. Of course, the smaller the particles are, the better you're going to get the better simulation you're going to get, and the more watery it's going to look like. But right now we're going to live with what we have with this. I'm just showing you the basic idea. We have this object falling into the water and interacting with the water and pushing it away, and that's what we want. So what we would like to do as well is that when this hits the water, we would like to create some kind of splash water splash. So what I'll do is I'll just grab this event, I'll copy it, the water. We want to continue to simulate it as before, so I'll say paste instance. And I'm going to bring this here. I don't need to emit particles. I'm going to keep it exactly the same, but we want to test the collision with that shape here. So to do that, we're going to use the intercollision. I'm going to drop that in. And the intercollision, we are going to test for the intercollision with other events than here. So I'll say with other events, and the event that this big debris is coming from is event number 3. So I'll just say test event number 3, and it's going to test true if it collides with any particle in event number 3. So if it does that, that's going to go here, and it's going to continue to work. And again, the collision, the MP collision here is going to, if ever they move in any direction, they are going to bounce back for this event. So if I just press play now, what we're going to get is as soon as they enter in collision. And actually, I'm going to change the color so we can see what's going on here. So if I change the color to something like red, actually, let's cancel this. I'm going to make this one unique and make this red, like so. As soon as you'll see that it's going to enter in collision, it's going to turn a few of them red, and you see that those have been entered in collision, and they continue their simulation, which is exactly what we want. So now that I've got this, we know that they're here. I would like to trap that event to say I want to spawn a new particle. I want to do a splash kind of effect. So I'm going to spawn once. And what I do want to spawn are just little water splashes. So I'm going to use a display operator here to see them. I'm going to connect it here, and I will display as lines again. So lines. So it's going to spawn once, and I want them to kind of spawn and splash in the air and then just evaporate. So I'm going to spawn once. I'm going to turn off inherit speed. I'm just going to say 0, and it's going to spawn multiple times. So let's say 150 to start. We'll see how it goes, and maybe a variation of 50. So we have some splashes that are more intense than others. And then from there, we're going to add a speed operator. The speed here. Speed operator. The speed, we are going to have all of these. The speed operator by default points down, so I'm going to say along icon arrow reverse, and I'll say divergence here is maybe of 20 degrees, so it's going to create a 20 degrees splash. And the speed, we're going to make it 100, and we'll see if it goes well, and maybe a variation of 50. And let's also add a delete operator so that we don't have a very long splash. A splash would last maybe 10 frames. So we're going to say particle by particle age. After 10 frames or maybe 15 frames, variation of 10, you are going to delete these particles. So let's press play and see what we have. So we have these splashes. They are kind of very straight. So we could play with the speed operator here and do something different. Maybe reduce the speed to something like 60 with a variation of 50. Divergence, we're going to make it like 45 degrees or 45. Here we go. And if we try this, we're going to get those water splashes there, something like that. Anyway, so that's kind of the idea for how you would create the particle system. But now we want the particles. We don't want to render those particles. We would like to render something more that looks like a water surface. So we have event number 2 and event number 4. I can rename them to have so that they're easily recognizable. So I'm going to call that water 2, and this event here I'm going to call that water 1. And I don't need to display those particles. I'm going to turn off the display of the geometry and also display water 2. We don't see them in the viewport, but they're still going to be simulated. So if I press play, we're going to kind of feel when we have water splashes, they kind of emit water like this. But in Max, we have this compound object called the blob mesh. So we'll add in a blob mesh in here. It's going to add the blob mesh, and the blob mesh, I'll make it blue, something like this. And I'll leave it with the default parameters to start, and I'll say blob object, I'll say pick, and I'll grab the particle flow source. Then my particle flow source will create the water effect. I don't want to emit from all of the events, so I'll turn off all particle flow event, and I'll say add, and I'll grab water 1 and water 2, and OK. And now we have this water surface. And now the tension is kind of high, so I'll say 0.1 as a tension, and you'll see that it's going to start to blend a little bit more. But as you, oops, I'm going to deselect here. Now what we have is it's based on our water surface, but every frame the blob mesh is being regenerated here, so that's why it takes a little bit more time to simulate the whole thing. But you'll see that as the object starts to interact with the water, it's going to kind of start to spread. And we have the water effect here, and it's going to interact with the rest of the water, and we're going to get some nice water splashes and all of that. Of course, if you want to do a real big water simulation, you need a lot more volume, smaller particles and things like that, but you get the idea of how you can create this kind of effect. Also, if you want to, you see that the water is kind of rough here, so you can apply the turbo smooth modifier. And if I do a few, just 1 or 2 iterations, you're going to get a smoother water surface. So that's kind of how you can create water. So in the next video, we'll show the whole simulation, all of these different components. We're going to bring them all together into a single particle flow system so that we can simulate the whole thing.